This is the story of Evelyn Hart, daughter of a lumber baron and betrothed to a man who saw her more as property than partner. And of Elias Vance, a fugitive with blood on his hands and a bounty on his head, living like a ghost among the granite peaks. Two souls who should have never crossed paths, and yet, when they did, the world around them shifted in ways neither could have foreseen. Before we begin, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if Evelyn's story stirs something in you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something darker, something that just might change the way you see redemption itself. Evelyn stood at the window of her father's parlour, her gloved hands resting on the sill, her pale blue eyes trained on the smoke curling from the chimneys of the town below. In 6 days, she was to become Mrs. Joseph Langston, a man 27 years her senior, with jowls like an ox and breath that stank of stale tobacco and sour mash. Langston was not cruel in the way men with fists could be cruel. His cruelty was quieter, more insidious. It was in the way he dismissed her questions with a thin smile, in the way he gripped her elbow a little too tightly when leading her through a crowd, in the way he had spoken to her father, bartering over her as if she were a side of beef. 6 days. It might as well have been a death sentence. Her father, Everett Hart, was not a man one defied lightly. 6'2", with shoulders like a church door and hands that had once split rails, Everett had built his lumber fortune with a grim sort of pride, turning the forests into coins and smoke. His word was law inside their high-roofed house of dark wood and velvet drapes, and Evelyn had been raised to understand that obedience was not optional. It was survival. Her mother had learned that too late, and the sadness that clung to her in her final years was something Evelyn had never wanted to inherit, but now it clung to her like an invisible shroud. She would not weep in front of him. Not again. He had no patience for tears. Still, she had tried to fight the engagement. She had begged, bargained, even threatened to leave. But Everett's response had been simple and cold. "You'll do as you're told, Evie. You think this world gives a damn what a girl like you wants? Langston's got money, and we need friends in Helena. You marry him, and we both come out ahead." That was the end of it. Her father had signed the engagement papers with the same pen he used to approve timber contracts. Langston had kissed her hand with lips that lingered too long, and Evelyn had smiled because it was what was expected of her. But inside, something was fraying, something that had held tight for 19 long years. It snapped the night she rode her mare into the Sinner edge of the Bitterroot Mountains without telling a soul. The town of Braeburn was already asleep by the time she reached the tree line. The moon hung low behind a veil of clouds, and Evelyn wore her riding cloak tight around her shoulders, the satin of her gown tucked beneath her thighs. She had no plan, only the breathless terror of staying and the cold fire of instinct that told her to flee. She had heard of girls running off before, of course. Most were caught and dragged back in disgrace. Some disappeared for good and were whispered about behind fans and glasses of sweet tea, but Evelyn knew something they didn't. She knew that her father's reach only extended as far as the town's fear of him. Once she crossed the creek that marked the northern border of his holdings, she would no longer be his daughter. She would be something else. She would be free. Or dead. There were worse things than death. The horse stumbled twice on the loose shale, but Evelyn held the reins tight, guiding the mare upward, deeper into the black moor of the forest. She didn't know how far she'd go or where she'd end up. She only knew she couldn't go back. Elias Vance had been living in a hollowed-out cave beneath Beartooth Ridge for 6 months when he first saw her. He'd built a life out of shadows and silence, trapping small game, boiling snow for water, and sleeping with one eye open. The world below had forgotten him, or tried to. The posters nailed to saloon walls and general store doors called him armed and dangerous, which was half true. He was armed, sure, and dangerous if cornered, but mostly, Elias just wanted to be left alone. He'd come west after everything went wrong in Missouri, After the fire, after the trial, after the noose that had nearly snapped his neck. He had escaped that night with nothing but the boots on his feet and the Colt Navy strapped to his belt. And ever since, he'd kept moving, vanishing into forests and mountains like smoke in the wind. But there was something about the girl he saw that morning, half hidden behind a curtain of pine, huddled beside a cold fire pit, her dress muddied and torn from the trail, that made him pause. She didn't belong here. Not with cheeks that soft and boots that clean. And definitely not alone. He watched her through his spyglass for the better part of an hour, debating whether to approach. She looked scared, not of bears or weather or dying, but of going back. It was none of his business. He had told himself that a dozen times, but he found himself moving anyway. Evelyn heard the soft rustle of boots in the brush before she saw him. Her heart leapt to her throat as her hand moved to the small knife hidden beneath her cloak. But when the man stepped into the clearing, she froze. He was tall, unshaven, with eyes the colour of wet ash and shoulders that looked carved from stone. His clothes were worn and patched, his boots caked with the red dust of high country, and he didn't say a word. He just looked at her, as if waiting to see if she'd scream or run or throw the knife clutched in her white-knuckled hand. She did none of those things. "Don't come closer," she said, voice shaking. "I won't." "What do you want?" "Should be asking you that. You're the one sitting on my woodpile." "I didn't know. I needed to rest." He gave a slow nod. "You running?" She hesitated. "Does it matter?" The man shrugged, then eased himself down on a nearby rock. "Only if they're chasing you." Evelyn blinked. They? Men. Like the kind who send girls in silk dresses into the woods with no map and no food. For the first time in days, she felt something strange, something dangerously close to relief. The air was thin up here, crisp and dry like old paper. It carried every sound, every breath, every small movement. Evelyn could hear the whisper of pine needles brushing against each other in the breeze, the scrape of Elias's boots on the rock, and the slow inhale he took as he sat across from her, arms draped loosely over his knees. She hadn't realized how loud the world could be when it wasn't filled with voices telling her what to do, how to act, how to smile. She tightened her cloak around herself, feeling the weight of the last few days settle across her chest like a stone. Dirt clung to her hemline. Her hair, usually pinned back with military precision by the maid her father hired, now hung in a loose braid down her back, strands escaping to frame her face. She didn't look like the girl in the engagement portraits Langston had paid a painter to render. That girl had roses on her cheeks and a calm, demure smile. That girl had vanished somewhere on the third night she spent sleeping under trees, her ribs aching from cold and her throat dry from fear. Elias didn't speak again for a long while. He simply watched her with those distant, flinty eyes, the kind that had seen too much and expected too little. He didn't ask her to explain herself, didn't try to fill the silence with questions or comfort. That, more than anything, made her feel something strange stir inside her chest. Not trust, not yet, but a kind of gravity, a reason to stay seated rather than bolt. "Who are you?" she asked finally. He gave a soft grunt, like he didn't much care for the question but wasn't offended either. "Nobody. You've got a cabin out here, a horse, enough supplies to last the winter. You're not nobody." "I didn't say I was nothing," Elias said, lifting a brow. "Just that I'm nobody you need to know." "And yet, here you are." His mouth twitched like it wanted to smirk, but changed its mind. "I came to see who was stupid enough to be this far into the woods alone. Wasn't expecting a debutante in riding boots." "I'm not a debutante," Evelyn said stiffly. "You ain't a trapper either." She looked down at her torn dress, at the bruises blooming along her arms and the scab on her palm. "No," she admitted, quieter this time. "I'm not." Elias stood eventually, brushing dirt from his trousers. "You'll freeze tonight if you stay here. That fire's dead, and the wind's picking up. I've got room in my place. One night, then you move on. If anyone's looking for you, I don't want them coming my way." Evelyn stared at him. She hadn't expected kindness or help, and she certainly hadn't expected both from a man who looked like he hadn't smiled in years. "Why help me at all?" He turned back toward the trees. "Because you look like someone who'd rather die out here than go back." He didn't wait for an answer, just started walking. The cabin was little more than a stone foundation with timber walls and a roof patched with pine boughs, but it was warmer than the night air and dry inside. Elias lit a lantern, the flame flickering shadows across shelves, lined with dried herbs, tin cups, and battered tools. A rifle leaned against the doorframe. A thick wool blanket hung across a cot tucked into the corner. Everything had a place. Everything had been arranged with the quiet focus of a man who didn't much like company. He handed her a canteen. "You hungry?" She took it with shaking fingers. "Starving." He moved around the room with quiet efficiency, opening a small crate by the hearth and pulling out a tin of beans, some dried meat, and a flat slab of hardtack. It wasn't the kind of meal she was used to, no silver spoons or porcelain bowls, but it was warm, and it didn't come with a price. They ate in silence. That night, Evelyn lay on the cot, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled of cedar and smoke. She could hear Elias outside, chopping firewood in the dark like he didn't need light to see what he was doing. She pictured him swinging that axe with the same calm rhythm he did everything else. No wasted motion. No words unless needed. The sort of man who made you forget how loud the world could be. She thought of Langston then, of his hands on her waist during that last forced dance at the town hall, the way his breath had rolled across her neck like a wet cloth. She had smiled through it, of course. She always smiled. But inside, she had been screaming. Now, for the first time, that voice inside her, the one that cried for escape, was quiet. Still. Like it was listening. Elias didn't sleep much. Never had. Not since Missouri. He took first watch from the porch, then circled the clearing once every few hours. He didn't expect anyone to have followed her this far. Most men wouldn't know how to track a wagon on dry stone, let alone a girl on a horse with fading prints. But Langston didn't strike him as the type who gave up what he'd paid for. He leaned against the porch post, a cigarette between his fingers. The stars were bright tonight, scattered like salt across a black tablecloth. Somewhere in the woods, an owl called out. Something answered. Elias didn't move. He was used to ghosts. Over the next 2 days, Evelyn didn't ask to leave. Elias didn't offer to take her. There was a rhythm to it, an unspoken agreement that neither of them quite acknowledged. She chopped wood with him, sorted herbs, learned how to boil water properly and patch a torn coat with sinew. She was clumsy at first, but determined. Elias didn't praise her, but he didn't stop her either. That meant more. She didn't tell him everything. Not about the wedding, not about her father's threats, but she told him enough. About the feeling of being owned, of the way people smiled at her in public, then ignored her ideas in private, of how she had dreams once. Small, quiet ones, like running a bookstore or learning to play piano. But those dreams had withered under the weight of other people's expectations. He listened without judgment, said little. But once, when she burned, her hand on the kettle and muttered a curse, he looked up and said, "Ain't weak to want more than what they gave you, just that." Then went back to slicing meat. On the 5th morning, Evelyn woke to the sound of voices. She sat up fast, the blanket falling from her shoulders. Elias was already at the door, rifle in hand, his face hard as stone. "Riders," he said without turning. "How many?" 3, maybe 4. Too far to see yet. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Langston? Could be. What do we do?" Elias looked at her then, really looked, like he was weighing something. Then he tossed her his second revolver. We make 'em wish they never came. The rifle was cold in her hands. Evelyn had never held one before. Not in any real way, not like this. Braced, loaded, aimed at something that might be aiming back. She'd seen firearms in cases at Langston's estate, decorative things etched with gold, polished and useless. But this rifle was different. It smelled of oil and pine smoke. It had nicks along the wooden stock, and the metal was worn smooth where a thumb had rested 100 times. This weapon had been carried through storms, shouldered in snow, fired at wolves and worse. Now it was hers. For the moment, anyway. Elias didn't say much as he moved through the cabin, preparing. He didn't panic. He didn't bark orders. He simply moved like a man who'd been here before, dozens of times, and who didn't waste energy on anything that didn't matter. He packed a small satchel with dried food, water, cartridges, unrolled a canvas bundle containing tools and bandages. When he passed her the revolver, a squat, heavy thing with a thick barrel and scratched grip, he paused just long enough to check her grip. "Don't squeeze it," he said quietly. "Let the weight do the work. Aim low. Center mass." She nodded, though her throat was dry. How close are they? Hard to say. Wind's carrying the sound. They might be 2 ridges out or 1, but they're coming. I saw a flash of silver. Saddle buckle, maybe. Moving like they know where they're going. Evelyn swallowed. "Then they know I'm with you." "They suspect," Elias said. "They don't know." That distinction, however small, gave her something to hold on to. They left the cabin by the back path, a narrow trail choked with roots and stones, barely more than a game trail winding into the thicker woods. Elias moved first, silent as smoke, his rifle strapped to his back and a small axe dangling from his belt. He didn't look back often, but when he did, it was only to check that she was still with him, still moving. Evelyn kept pace, every step burning her calves and scraping her boots. But she didn't complain. She didn't need to. The air was taut with the kind of dread that made words feel like wasted breath. They climbed until the trees thinned out, and the rocks grew sharper, grey slate jutting up through the earth like broken teeth. At a ridge above the cabin, Elias crouched, motioning her down beside him. They waited, and then she saw them, 4 riders, just as he'd said, moving in a loose column, 2 in front and 2 trailing. They weren't wearing badges, but they moved like men used to giving orders. One wore a long grey coat that flapped behind him like a curtain. Another had a rifle strapped to his back, longer than Elias's, with a polished scope glinting in. The light. They slowed as they reached the cabin, circling it like wolves sniffing out a scent. "Langston's men?" she asked. 2 of them, maybe. Hired hands. The rest could be bounty hunters. Evelyn's fingers clenched around the revolver. "He said if I ran, he'd find me. Drag me back in chains." Elias turned his head slowly, meeting her eyes. "Then we make sure he doesn't." The riders dismounted, fanning out around the clearing. One moved to the porch, kicked the door open with the heel of his boot. Another circled wide, eyes scanning the tree line, pausing just shy of where Elias and Evelyn lay hidden above. She held her breath. The man at the porch shouted something. Couldn't make out the words, but the tone was sharp, frustrated. Then a shot rang out, just one, sharp and loud and final. Evelyn flinched. "What was that?" "Warning," Elias said. "They're trying to smoke us out, but we're not there." "Exactly." He motioned for her to follow again, and they slipped back from the ridge, disappearing into a narrow gully that ran down the far side of the mountain. It was steep and slick with gravel, but Elias moved like he'd walked it 100 times. Evelyn followed, every footstep careful, deliberate, like a deer avoiding a snare. By midday, they reached a second cabin, this one older, more weathered, barely standing. It leaned to one side like a drunk, with moss growing up the beams and a broken chimney caved in on one edge. But Elias moved toward it with confidence, brushing aside the dead vines and pushing open the warped door with a shoulder. "What is this place?" "Hunting lodge. Belonged to a trapper I knew. Died 5 winters ago. Most folks don't know it's here." She stepped inside. Dust and rot filled the air, but it was dry and the floor held under her boots. So what's the plan? Elias turned, leaned his rifle against the frame. We wait. Evelyn frowned. That's it? They'll split up soon. That's what men like them do when they think they've got an advantage. Get impatient, get sloppy. You can't outrun 'em forever, but you can outthink 'em. She watched him settle into a crouch near the hearth, striking a match against the stone to light a stub of a candle. The flickering light cast strange shadows across his face, bringing out the scars. Small ones, thin lines that traced his cheek and brow like ghost stories. She realized she wanted to ask how he'd gotten them, not out of pity, just to know. Just to understand the man who was willing to risk everything for a girl he didn't owe a damn thing to. Why are you helping me? She asked again. Elias didn't look up. Because I remember what it feels like to have nowhere to go. He said it like a confession, quiet but heavy, and then he added, because I killed a man once, and I ain't sure it was the wrong thing to do. That night, they camped in silence again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was charged now. Closer. Elias shared his coat, slung over her shoulders like armor, and she didn't give it back. She sat beside him near the dead hearth, on the revolver resting in her lap, and he showed her how to load it by touch alone. The trick is not thinking about what's on the other end, he said. You aim, you breathe, you squeeze. The rest is noise. Evelyn looked up at him. But what if I can't pull the trigger? Elias looked back. Then you're not ready. Her jaw tightened. And if I am, then they won't know what. Hit 'em. The next morning, one of the riders found the cabin. He came alone, leading his horse on foot, eyes scanning the trail ahead. Evelyn spotted him first, crouched behind the collapsed chimney. She felt her pulse in her throat, thudding, loud as war drums. The man didn't look dangerous, not at first. Young, maybe 30, with a thin beard and a faded blue scarf around his neck. But he moved with that same hunter's stride, alert and efficient. She could kill him. Right now. One shot, and he'd drop. But her finger trembled on the trigger. Elias appeared behind her, silent as a ghost. He didn't touch her, just whispered, "Now's your chance." Her breath caught. The gun was heavy. The man moved closer. Then, in a moment that felt stretched across lifetimes, Evelyn stood. She didn't fire. Not yet. Instead, she stepped. Out! Revolver raised. The man froze. "Drop it," she said, voice steady, louder than she expected. He hesitated. Just a heartbeat. Then Elias stepped out behind her, rifle cocked. That did it. The man raised his hands, dropped the reins, and didn't reach for his own weapon. All right, he said. Didn't come looking for a fight. Then what did you come for? Just looking for a girl, the man said, eyes flicking between them. Her daddy's paying a small fortune to bring her back. She's not going back. That ain't your call, mister. Elias stepped closer. Ain't it? The rider looked at Evelyn then. Really looked. Like he saw her not as a prize, but as a person. Something shifted in his eyes. Pity? Regret? Don't reckon you want to go back, huh? She shook her head. I'd rather die out here. The man sighed, slow and tired. Didn't sign up to haul scared girls back to chains. I'll say I didn't find you. You move west, fast. By the time they figure I lied, you'll be 3 counties gone. She didn't speak, just nodded. And like that, he was gone. Later, as they packed what little they had into Elias's satchel, Evelyn turned to him and said, Do you think he meant it? That he won't tell the others? Elias cinched the bag closed. Doesn't matter. We don't bet on hope. We move. Where? He looked west, past the trees, toward a range of low hills swallowed by haze. There's a canyon out there, empty land, water, safe. Evelyn nodded, her fingers brushing the revolver on her hip. I can't ever go back, can I? She asked. No, Elias said. But maybe that's a good thing. They rode hard the first day, not because the trail was steep, though it was. The path winding through dry scrub and juniper thickets, sometimes narrowing to barely more than a ledge over a drop, but because Elias had that particular look in his eyes, the kind men get when something's stirring in their bones. Not fear exactly, more like an itch that can't be scratched, a knowing that the quiet around them wasn't as empty as it seemed. He didn't say it aloud, but Evelyn felt it too. That brittle silence that had nothing to do with peace and everything to do with danger, waiting just outside of sight. By midday, the land began to change. The forest thinned, and the pines gave way to low, knotted trees and dry golden grass, sharp and rustling like whispers on the wind. Jagged stone formations jutted up from the soil like ancient bones, weathered by time and storm, some towering high enough to cast long shadows even with the sun overhead. The sky was cloudless, but the air had a heaviness to it, like the mountain was holding its breath. They stopped once to water the horses at a shallow stream that wound through a narrow gully. Elias knelt by the edge, cupping his hands and drinking deeply, then filled their canteens in silence. Evelyn stayed mounted, eyes scanning the ridgelines above. Her fingers itched toward the revolver more than once, even though there was no sign of movement, no sound but the wind. "How much farther?" she asked as he mounted again. "Another day, maybe 2, he said. "Depends how much ground we make before dusk." "What's out there?" Elias looked ahead, where the horizon shimmered. An old route the miners used, abandoned now. Few way stations, maybe a cave or 2. But there's water, shelter. If we're lucky, no eyes. And if we're not lucky, he met her gaze, then we make 'em regret following us. That night, they made camp beneath a stone outcropping shaped like a horned beast. The land was eerie, almost mythic. The stones glowed faint orange in the dying light, casting long, twisted shadows, and the silence was deeper here, ancient, untouched. Evelyn sat with her back to a boulder, cleaning the revolver by firelight like he taught her. The rhythm calmed her, soothed the tremble in her hands. She'd stopped asking herself whether she could kill a man if it came to it. The answer had settled somewhere deep inside her now, hard, cold, certain. She watched Elias tend the fire, every motion slow, methodical. He didn't fidget, didn't waste breath on anything that didn't need saying. But something was shifting between them. She felt it every time their eyes met and lingered a moment too long. Felt it in the silence between words, the way his voice softened when he said her name. He was still distant, still carrying whatever weight had hollowed out the edges of his soul, but he didn't flinch from her like he had the first days. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked the quiet. "You ever loved someone?" Elias didn't answer at first. Just tossed another stick into the fire, watching the sparks dance. Then, once, she waited. Years ago, before the war, before everything got broken. "What happened?" He shook his head slowly. "I chose the fight. She didn't. She left. Never blamed her for it." Evelyn nodded, the fire warming her face. "I was supposed to marry a man I didn't love. I think part of me was ready to. Just to get it over with. To stop feeling like I owed my father something. Like I owed everyone something." "You don't owe anyone a damn thing now," Elias said. She looked over. "Not even you." Their eyes locked across the fire. His face was unreadable at first, carved from the same stone they sat beneath. But then something shifted in his jaw, the tiniest twitch of restraint. "You don't owe me," he said finally. "But you're safe with me. That's a promise." Evelyn turned back toward the flames, heart drumming. It wasn't love yet, not the kind with declarations or embraces, but something deeper, a shared silence, a trust built one hard mile at a time, and for now, that was enough. They rode again before dawn, slipping through the shadows as the first light bled across the sky. The terrain grew harsher, dry washes, cracked earth, patches, of cactus tall as men. Ravens circled overhead in loose spirals, their cries harsh and mocking. The horses slowed, spooked by the stillness. Evelyn kept her hand near her weapon, every step a test of her nerves. By midday, they reached the edge of the gorge. It cut through the land like a scar, deep, sheer-sided, nearly 100 feet across in places. Red stone walls dropped straight into blackness, and the only way across was an old mining bridge, barely more than frayed planks and rope swaying in the wind. Elias didn't hesitate. He dismounted, tested the first board with his boot, then led his horse across, slowly. Evelyn held her breath as the wood groaned beneath him, the rope creaking like it might snap at any moment, but he made it. Turned. Waited. Evelyn's horse snorted nervously as she took the reins. "You'll be fine," she whispered, more to herself than the animal. The bridge swayed worse under her. Each step felt like it might be her last, the wind rushing up from the depths below like a hand trying to grab her by the ankles. But she kept her eyes on Elias, never looked down, and made it across with her heart pounding in her throat. He caught her bridle gently as she stepped onto solid ground. "You, all right?" she nodded. "I'm not scared of heights. You should be. This place eats people." That night, the storm came. Not with lightning or thunder, but with dust and wind and that strange electric pressure that presses against your skull and makes the animals restless. The sky turned yellow, then grey, then almost black as the wind picked up. Elias had found a small overhang near the canyon wall, deep enough to hunker under, and they took shelter there, huddled close to keep warm as the dust howled past outside. They didn't speak for a long time. When Elias finally did, it was like something cracked inside him. "There's a price for killing a man," he said, voice low. Evelyn turned to look at him. "I don't mean jail. I mean here." He tapped his chest. "You don't forget the first one. Doesn't matter if he deserved it. Doesn't matter if you were right. His face stays with you, every time it's quiet." She listened. "I used to dream about it. Still do sometimes. That's why I live out here. Not for peace, for distance." "Do you regret it?" she asked. "No," he said. "And that's the part that scares me." The storm passed by mourning, leaving the world painted in pale dust and broken branches. They moved out again, following a hidden route Elias knew from his trapping days. But something was wrong. The horses were uneasy, the air too still. They found the tracks just after noon, hoofprints, fresh, leading west. Elias studied them with a scowl. "Someone's ahead of us, or waiting." Evelyn's stomach turned. Could it be that rider who let us go? Doubt it. "This is a heavier horse. And this one." He pointed, tracing the drag of a boot heel in the dirt. "This one's limping." She raised a brow. "Langston." Elias didn't answer. They moved slower after that, cutting away from the trail, sticking to high ground. Evelyn carried the revolver in her lap now, thumb brushing the hammer with every jolt of the saddle. The canyon was tighter here, with the walls rising on both sides. The shadows were deep, and the wind carried voices farther than it should have. That evening, they saw the campfire, far ahead. Just one. Nestled in a crevice, where the canyon opened up slightly. Too small to be a posse, too bold to be a trapper. Elias crouched beside her horse, studying the flame. Could be a scout, could be someone ahead of us tracking slow. Evelyn rested her hand on his shoulder. "What do we do?" "We go around. There's a path through the rocks up there. Adds half a day, but we won't get caught with our backs to the canyon." She nodded, trusting him. But just as they turned, a voice rang out across the canyon. "Elias Boone!" The name echoed off the stone. Evelyn froze. Elias stiffened. "I know it's you, Boone," the voice called again. "Ain't many ghosts walk like you do." Elias stood slowly, turned toward the firelight. A silhouette stepped forward, broad, limping, grey coat flapping, long rifle across his back. "Been looking for you a long time," the man said, "and now you show up babysitting some runaway bride." Evelyn's blood went cold. Elias didn't reach for his weapon, just said, quietly, "Hello, Morrow." The man smiled. The name struck Evelyn like a bullet to the gut. Morrow. She didn't know the man, hadn't heard the stories whispered behind saloon doors or in the rustling of bounty sheets, but the way Elias said it, quiet, sharp, like a name, that carried more weight than it had syllables, was enough. That was no random scout or passing drifter. That was a ghost that hadn't stayed buried. Morrow stepped closer to the fire, just enough that the flames threw orange shadows up across his face. He was tall, though the limp cut his height by a sliver. His jaw was squared and brutal, the kind of chin that looked like it could take a punch and not remember who threw it. A jagged scar slashed across one cheekbone, and his eyes were dark, set deep and gleaming with something that wasn't quite madness, but sure as hell wasn't peace. "Hell of a place to run into you," Morrow said, voice low and thick with amusement. "Mountain wind must be stirring up old sins." Elias didn't flinch. "You're a long way from where I left you. And you're a long way from where I buried your name." Morrow's grin was slow, ugly. "Heard whispers about a man who never died, just went up into the hills and turned into smoke. Like a bad dream." He looked past Elias now, eyes landing on Evelyn. "Wasn't expecting you to have company, though. Pretty little thing. What's she running from? A father? A husband? A preacher with a ring too big for his finger?" Evelyn said nothing. She didn't need to. Her hand was already resting on the revolver. She didn't draw it, didn't twitch, but it was clear as sunrise that she wasn't about to be spoken about like a prize hog at auction. Elias stepped forward a half pace, shielding her without being obvious about it. "You came alone?" he asked. Morrow chuckled. "Would you believe me if I said yes?" "No." "Didn't think so." Elias scanned the cliffs, the shadows above, the ridgelines that cradled the canyon like crooked arms. Morrow was a killer, sure, but he wasn't a fool. If he was here, someone else was too. "This don't have to end with bullets," Morrow went on. "I ain't looking to spill blood if I don't have to. Just want what I'm owed." Elias' voice turned to stone. "You're owed nothing." "Oh, I'm owed plenty, Boone. You ran. You left us. Left me to rot with the bodies while you slinked off to live like a ghost. They burned our names out there in the dust, but you just vanished. And now look at you, playing outlaw guardian angel to some runaway bride." He spat into the dirt. "I ought to kill you just for that." Silence fell again, thick and cloying. The fire cracked. Wind whispered through the rock. Elias's voice, when it came, was low and final. "You can try." And just like that, everything broke loose. The first shot rang out from above, a crack of thunder echoing against the stone, and a puff of dirt exploded a foot from Elias's boot. He yanked Evelyn down and rolled behind a boulder as another shot tore past overhead. The horses screamed and bolted into the shadows, their hooves thunder fading into the dark. More bullets came, peppering the rocks, chipping away at stone like angry bees. "2 shooters," Elias muttered, breath harsh. "One on the ridge, others behind that scrub to the west." Evelyn yanked the revolver from her belt. "What do we do?" "We wait. We make 'em move first." He glanced at her, eyes narrowing. "You ready?" She nodded, jaw tight. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled free a small, cloth-wrapped bundle, unfurled it with practiced hands. A short-barreled scattergun, ugly and functional, loaded it in silence. Then he met her eyes. "On my signal, you run to that outcrop. Stay low. Don't stop." Another bullet sparked against the stone. "You'll be exposed," she said. Elias grinned, teeth like wolves. "So will they," she didn't argue, not now. She just tightened her grip and waited. "Go!" She ran. The ground blurred beneath her boots. Dust kicked up in every direction. She heard the shot behind her. 1, then 2. But none found their mark. She slid behind the next cluster of boulders, just as Elias rose from cover and fired. The scattergun barked, wide and unforgiving, and one of the riflemen above howled. Evelyn peeked out just in time to see him tumble from the ridge, his body ragdolling through air before it slammed into a dead bush below. Still, Elias was already moving, ducking and weaving, his coat snapping behind him. Morrow shouted something, from the shadows, something angry, furious, but it was drowned out by another blast from Elias's weapon. The second shooter didn't cry out, just vanish behind the scrub. Then there was silence, not the silence of peace, but the kind that comes after a storm when the sky is waiting to see who's still alive. Evelyn stood slowly. Dust clung to her sweat-slicked skin. Her heart thundered, but her hands were steady. Elias appeared out of the gloom, blood on his sleeve but no limp in his stride. She rushed to him. "You're hit!" Just a graze. He looked toward the dark where Morrow had stood, now empty. "He's gone. You sure?" "No." His jaw tightened. "But he won't be far. Not yet." They moved again that night. No fire, no talking, just horses breathing heavy and the sound of hooves over dead leaves. They rode higher into the ridges, away from the gorge, until the world flattened into plateaus and windswept mesas. The moon was half hidden by clouds, casting everything in ghostlight. By dawn, they found a cave, narrow, high-walled, with just enough room for the horses and a patch of dry grass near the back. Elias checked the perimeter twice before they settled in. When they finally stopped, Evelyn sat against the cave wall and exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath for days. Elias knelt beside her, cleaning the graze with a strip of cloth. "They won't hit us again tonight. Morrow's smart enough to lick his wounds first." Evelyn watched his hands work. "You knew him, back then." He nodded. "Who was he?" "A brother in arms," Elias said, voice tired. "We rode together. During the war. Afterward, we took bounty work. Dirty jobs, rough ones, the kind that pay you in regrets. What happened?" "One job went sideways. A town didn't want law. We tried to bring it anyway." His eyes darkened. "They burned it all. Morrow blamed me. Said I made the wrong call. Maybe I did." She rested a hand on his arm. "You're not that man anymore." Elias met her eyes. "Maybe I am. I just don't wear it on the outside." She leaned in, close enough to feel his breath. "You're the man who got me out, who could have left but didn't, who stood between me and a bullet." He looked at her, and for once, the mask dropped. Just a little. "Maybe I just didn't want to see someone else get burned the way I did." And then, just for a moment, he kissed her. It wasn't long. It wasn't sweet, but it was real. Honest. A collision of fear and fire and everything they'd been holding back. When it ended, neither of them spoke. They just sat, side by side, as the mountain wind howled outside and the sun climbed slow over the broken land. The road ahead would be worse. They both knew it. Morrow would regroup. He'd gather more men. The bounty on Evelyn's head was too tempting, and the grudge he carried too heavy to set down. The law might be behind them, but the past was catching up fast. And somewhere beyond the next ridge, a choice waited. Keep running, or make a stand. But for now, for just this sliver of morning, they were alive, together, and still moving forward. That was enough. The quiet didn't last. It never did in the mountains. Not when your enemies knew your name, not when they could track you by the smoke of a fire you didn't light, or the hoofprint you thought you'd buried in dust. Elias knew better than to believe in peace. Peace was a word whispered by liars and dying men. What you had, if you were lucky, was a pause, a breath, and when you got one, you held on to it like it was a dying ember, because you knew the cold was coming, and come it did. The first sign wasn't gunfire. It was stillness, too much of it. The birds had gone silent by mid-morning. No hawks wheeling overhead, no chirp of sparrows hiding in the brush. Even the wind seemed to die in its throat, curling around the edge of the cave like it didn't want to go any farther. Evelyn noticed it first. She had taken to scouting the cliff edge while Elias checked the horses, her figure a silhouette against the sky. She came back faster than usual. "There's something wrong." Elias was already strapping the saddlebag back into place. "Tell me." No movement, no birds, not even rabbits. It's like the mountains holding its breath. He paused, listening to her words, and to the silence. She was right. The stillness was wrong. Out here, nature was noisy. Living things moved, hunted, ran. But when killers came near, they went still. He tightened the cinch, checked his revolver, and grabbed the Winchester. "They're close." Evelyn didn't argue. She holstered her weapon, grabbed her pack, and climbed up into her saddle. The horses were restless, as if they too could feel the pressure building in the air. "Which way?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. "Northwest. There's an old mine shaft just below Widow's Peak, covered by bramble and deadfall. If we make it there, we can vanish. And if we don't—" He looked at her, and for once didn't answer. They rode fast and hard. Dust kicked up behind them like smoke trails. The sun hung overhead, burning the path gold and white. Every twist of the trail could have been an ambush. Every rustle in the brush, a barrel waiting to rise. But the road stayed, empty, for now. Elias knew it wouldn't last. He'd spent too many years tracking men across terrain like this, and he could feel it in his bones. Someone was behind them. Not close, not yet, but gaining. The rhythm of a pursuer wasn't loud. It was like a second heartbeat, just off beat, just behind, always catching up. By the time the mine came into view, shadows had begun to stretch across the cliffs. Widow's Peak jutted above them like a broken tooth, the remains of some ancient volcanic fury long buried. The mine was a wound in the side of the slope, half collapsed and hidden behind thorn and brush. Elias dismounted and began pulling away the dead wood. "Inside. Quick." Evelyn ducked in first, coughing against the stale air. The mine was tight, the ceiling low, but deep. Elias followed, dragging brush back across the entrance once the horses were tethered and silent. Inside, it smelled of old rock and dry earth. Not death, at least not yet. They sat in the dark, lit only by a narrow shaft of light that pierced through a crack near the top. Evelyn leaned against the stone. "How long can we stay here?" "Long enough to catch our breath." She looked at him. "You think he's behind us?" Elias stared into the dark. "No, I know he is." She said nothing for a long time. The quiet between them had changed. Not awkward, not afraid, just full of things they both knew, but hadn't spoken aloud. "He blames you," she said at last. Elias nodded. "You didn't pull the trigger." "No, but I gave the order." Her voice was softer. "You think he's right?" "I think it doesn't matter anymore. Truth don't buy you much when blood's been spilled. He lost brothers, so did I. He just never stopped bleeding." They sat in silence after that. Somewhere above, a crow cawed once, then nothing. The ambush came at dawn. It wasn't loud, not at first. A scrape of boots on stone. A whisper of dry grass. Elias was awake before it even happened, his eyes already on the shaft of light as it grew from ember to gold. He placed a hand gently on Evelyn's shoulder. "Wake up," he whispered. "There, here." She stirred fast, no panic, just readiness. She'd changed since that first night, sharpened, hardened. Still herself, but different. Something had been burned away. Elias crawled toward the edge of the mine entrance, peered through a slit in the deadfall. 3 men. One crouched low with a repeater, another scanning the horizon. The third, tall, calm, and dressed in black, was unmistakably Morrow. They were setting up quietly, patiently. No yelling, no posturing. Just men doing a job. The kind who weren't here to chase. They were here to kill. Elias slithered back, looked at Evelyn. We can't outgun 'em, but I know the terrain. There's a chute on the far side of this mine. Drops down into Devil's Basin. Too narrow for horses. But if we move fast, they'll see us, she said. Yes, but we only need one to chase. Her eyes narrowed. You mean to split up? It's the only way. No. Evelyn, no, she snapped. You go out there alone, he'll kill you. Elias stared at her. She was trembling, not from fear, but from the way desperation tightened in her chest. I've lost everything, she whispered. My mother, my home. I gave up my name. You're all I have left. You don't get to die now. His heart squeezed at that. He reached out and touched her cheek, thumb brushing away dust. Then we don't die, he said softly. Not today. The plan was chaos, not strategy, not perfection, just chaos. Elias kicked free the brush, fired 2 wild shots into the sky and bolted. He didn't aim to hit, just to draw. The men shouted, scattered. Morrow bellowed orders. Evelyn slipped out the side, crouching low, running fast. Elias led them up the ridge, boots scraping, heart hammering. Shots rang out behind him, tearing chunks from the cliffside. One nicked his shoulder, another punched the dirt by his boot. He kept moving, 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 until he wasn't. A rock caught him mid-stride. His ankle twisted, leg buckling, and he crashed down hard against the stone. Wind gone, vision swimming. He rolled over and saw Morrow standing above him, revolver raised. No words, just the end. Click, dry. The chamber spun uselessly. Morrow's brow furrowed. Elias didn't wait. He surged upward, tackled the man, and they went down together in a tangle of limbs and hate. Fists flew, elbows cracked bone. Morrow slammed a knee into Elias's ribs, drove a punch across his jaw that split skin. Elias answered with a headbutt that sent them both reeling. They broke apart, bleeding, gasping. Morrow spat blood. Should have stayed dead, Boone. Elias staggered to his feet. Been trying. You just won't let me. The last man never saw Evelyn coming. She stepped out from the rock, revolver, already aimed, and put a bullet through his knee. He dropped like a sack of grain, screaming. She didn't fire again, just ran. By the time she reached the ridge, Morrow and Elias were still circling, both bleeding, both barely standing. Stop! She shouted. They turned. She raised the gun. End it, she said. Now. Morrow stared at her. You ain't got the steel, girl. Try me. He took a step. She didn't hesitate. The gun roared. The bullet hit him square in the thigh, sending him down hard. He howled, clutching at the wound. Elias limped toward her, breath ragged. You okay? She nodded. You? Not yet, but I'm still breathing. They looked down at Morrow, who was trying and failing to crawl. You'll die out here, Evelyn said. Morrow sneered. Better than dying in a cell. Elias stared at him. Then rot. And they left him. They didn't run, didn't look back, just walked into the dawn side by side. There was no finish line, no perfect place waiting at the end. But somewhere beyond the cliffs, beyond the reach of bounty hunters and broken men, there were valleys untouched by war, canyons unmarked, by blood, and maybe, just maybe, a piece of land where a man and a woman could stop running, where a fugitive and a runaway could become something else. Not legends, not ghosts, just human. And that was enough. The days that followed were quiet, but not peaceful. Elias and Evelyn rode hard, far beyond the ridges they'd once thought of as safe, past the northern draw where dead men had bled into the dust, and over the jagged pass that Elias hadn't crossed in 6 years. There were no trails this far out, only memory and guesswork, old instincts and stars overhead. Each night they built, no fire, slept in the cold and spoke little. The world was hushed now, not because they had escaped danger, but because they had passed into a place where even the danger slept. The country changed around them. The red rocks softened into green hills. Pines gave way to tall grass and twisting cottonwoods. They found a creek that cut a silver path through a low valley and followed it east, deeper into land unclaimed and uncharted. It was a strange feeling, freedom, not like the kind Evelyn had once imagined, not a ribboned finish line or some grand gate to step through. It was something simpler. The way her lungs felt after a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The absence of weight. The faint, distant sensation that maybe, just maybe, no one was coming anymore. By the third night, they found a rise above the creek and made camp in a ring of old oaks. The horses were calm, the sky was thick with stars, and for the first time since they met, Elias lit a fire. Evelyn sat close, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the flames with eyes too old for her face. "You sure this is safe?" she asked. "No," Elias said, "but safer than running, blind." She looked at him, her face half lit by the fire. "You really think he'll die out there?" "Morrow." Elias shrugged. "He ain't dead yet, but he's not chasing us anymore." "You sound sure." "I'm not. But I've seen. Men like him. Vengeance is a kind of fire. Burns hot, fast, leaves nothing but ashes. If he's got anything left in him, it ain't fury. It's pain. And pain don't ride near as hard." She nodded, silent for a while. Then, quietly, "I almost killed him." "I know. I wanted to. I know that too." She turned her gaze back to the fire, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "I think I could have done it." Elias didn't answer right away. He just watched the flames, listened to the crackle and the rustle of night creatures in the brush. When he did speak, his voice was slow, steady. "Killing a man ain't hard, Evelyn. It's remembering you did it that makes it rough. Don't matter if it's righteous or not. It stays with you. Changes how you move, how you sleep, how you... Look at your own hands." She looked down at hers, palms rough from days in the saddle, skin chapped by sun and wind. "I already changed," she said softly. He looked at her, really looked, and nodded. "Yeah, you have." They stayed in that valley a week. Elias found an old hunting cabin, long abandoned, half buried under vines and rot. The roof was collapsed in the back, but the walls held. A little work, and it was livable. More than that, it was theirs. No one came this way anymore. The roads were too wild, the land too far from any stage line or rail. This was the kind of place you went when you didn't want to be found, and it was perfect. They rebuilt with their hands, cut timber from the North Ridge, hauled stone from the creek bed, made tools from scrap and memory. Elias taught Evelyn how to split wood, how to set snares, how to listen for the way wind carried voices. She learned fast. She always had. There was something in her now, something hard and clear. Not bitterness, but resolve. Like a blade that had been tempered by fire, shaped and cooled and sharpened. Their days fell into rhythm. Work, watch, eat, sleep. No dreams, only breath, only forward. And slowly, something bloomed between them. Not the kind of burning romance whispered in saloon corners or written on folded paper. It was quieter than that. Older, a companionship forged from shared pain and the simple mutual decision not to leave. Elias never spoke promises. Evelyn never asked for them. But when she woke screaming from dreams she couldn't remember, he was always there. And when his shoulder seized up from the wound he hadn't let her clean properly, she cursed him and took care of it without complaint. They didn't say they needed each other, but they never walked more than 10 paces apart. One night, a storm rolled through. The sky broke open with fury, and the wind came down like a blade. Lightning cracked the ridge, thunder chased it close. The rain flooded their small camp, turning dirt to slick mud and the creek to a roaring threat. Evelyn stood in the doorway of the half-repaired cabin, soaked to the bone, watching it all with wide, stunned eyes. Elias came up behind her, tossed a blanket over her shoulders. You ever seen a storm like this? She shook her head. Not like this. Not so wild. They call 'em thunderbenders out here. Mountain storms. Fast. Mean. They roll through. Quick, but leave a mark. The wind howled around them, and for a moment Evelyn leaned against him. Not in fear, but something else. Something grounding. Her voice was quiet. Is that what we are, Elias? A thunderstorm? He looked at her. At the fire in her eyes and the iron in her spine. No, he said. We're what comes after. But peace, even the fragile kind, is never permanent. It was mid-afternoon when Elias saw the rider, just one, high on the western ridge, too far for a shot, too still to be a traveller. The figure watched for a long moment, then turned and vanished behind the trees. Elias didn't panic. He packed, quietly, thoroughly, like he'd done 100 times before. Evelyn came back from the creek, saw the bags by the door. What is it? She asked. Watcher. Her face hardened. You think they found us? Don't know. Might just be a scout. Might be worse. But we can't risk it. She looked back at the hills, jaw clenched. We built all this. And we can build it again. She nodded once, but her eyes stayed on the horizon. We run again, Elias. Where do we go next? He stepped beside her, rested a hand on her shoulder. Not far. Just smarter. Just long enough. She didn't answer, just picked up her pack and slung it over her shoulder. They didn't leave that night. They waited, watched, listened, and, when nothing came, not the next day, not the one after, they stayed. Because running had a cost too. It stole from you, made you ghosts in your own story. They fortified the cabin instead, built traps, dug trenches, set up lines with bells made, from scrap tin that would ring if tripped. And every night Elias took the watch. Evelyn tried to argue once, said they should take turns. He didn't let her. You get your rest, he said. I'll get mine when we're safe. She didn't argue again, but she didn't sleep well either. The silence had changed again, not the silence of safety, the silence before something broke. And then one morning they found a mark, etched into a tree near the creek. A symbol, rough, crude, 3 slashes in the bark, not random. Elias stared at it for a long time. What is it? Evelyn asked. A warning. From who? He didn't answer, because he already knew, and if he was right, the storm they'd survived wasn't the last one. It was the first.